Imagine powering your entire home with nothing but sunlight. Today, that's becoming reality for millions. But in 1883, when gas lamps still lit our streets and electricity was in its infancy, one forgotten genius dared to dream this impossible dream. This is the story of Charles Fritts, the man who built the world's first solar panel, only to be ignored, ridiculed, and erased from history. Let me know in the comments if you've ever heard of him, because chances are you haven't. The year was 1883. Thomas Edison's pearl-white electric lights were just beginning to illuminate New York City's wealthy neighborhoods, while the rest of America still relied on gas lamps and candlelight. The war of currents between Edison and Tesla hadn't even begun, and most people still viewed electricity as a dangerous novelty. But in a modest New York workshop, Charles Fritts was quietly working on something that would make Edison's breakthrough look primitive by comparison. Fritts wasn't born into privilege or scientific royalty. A working-class inventor and electrocomist, he had witnessed firsthand how the poor struggled to afford even basic illumination. Gas lighting was expensive, dangerous, and filled homes with noxious fumes, while Edison and his peers focused on harnessing the power of coal and copper wire. Fritts became obsessed with a different source of energy, one that was free, abundant, and accessible to everyone: sunlight. But this wasn't just about lighting homes. Fritts had a profound understanding that would take the rest of the world nearly a century to grasp. Our reliance on fossil fuels wasn't sustainable. He envisioned a future where the sun, not coal, would power human civilization. If you're thinking this sounds impossibly ahead of its time, you're right. Drop A in the comments if you're amazed by how forward-thinking this was. Fritts faced obstacles that would have broken a lesser inventor. The scientific understanding of photovoltaic effects was in its infancy, while Heinrich Hertz and James Clerk Maxwell were still debating the fundamental nature of light. Fritts was trying to harness it for electrical power. The leading minds of his time insisted it couldn't be done. Solar power was dismissed as a fantasy, like perpetual motion machines or alchemy. His greatest challenge wasn't just technical, it was financial. Unlike Edison, who had wealthy backers and a growing corporate empire, Fritts worked largely alone. He funded his research with his modest savings, often going without basic necessities to buy materials for his experiments. The selenium needed for his solar cells was expensive and difficult to obtain. Each failed attempt meant precious resources wasted. The scientific establishment openly mocked his ideas. At conferences, his papers were relegated to the back pages or ignored entirely. Respected journals refused to publish his findings. One prominent physicist declared that generating useful power from sunlight was as likely as extracting gold from seawater. The ridicule was relentless, but Fritts persisted. Perhaps most frustrating was the primitive state of materials science. The tools and precision instruments we take for granted today didn't exist. Fritts had to invent new techniques just to create the ultra-thin selenium coatings his cells required. Every step was a battle against the limitations of 19th century technology. But then, in 1883, Fritts achieved the impossible. In his workshop, he created something that would change the world. Even if the world wasn't ready to notice, he constructed the first working solar cell, a device that could convert sunlight directly into electricity. His design was ingenious in its simplicity. He took a thin layer of selenium and pressed it between plates of gold-leafed brass. When sunlight hit the selenium, it generated a small but measurable electric current. The efficiency was low by today's standards, less than 1%, but it worked. This wasn't just a laboratory curiosity. It was a working solar panel, the ancestor of every solar cell on Earth today. Fritts didn't stop there. He assembled these cells into larger panels and mounted them on a New York City rooftop. Think about that for a moment. The world's first solar array was quietly generating electricity in Manhattan, while horse-drawn carriages still crowded the streets below. If you're as blown away by this as I am, hit that like button and let me know in the comments. What's truly remarkable is how similar Fritts' basic design was to modern solar cells. While the materials have changed, we now use silicon instead of selenium. The fundamental principle remains the same. He even predicted that his solar panels would eventually compete with coal-fired power plants and revolutionize the energy industry. Remember, this was in 1883. Werner von Siemens, one of the few prominent scientists who recognized the importance of Fritts' work, declared it a scientific milestone. But even this endorsement from one of the world's leading electrical engineers wasn't enough to secure Fritts the recognition he deserved. Despite creating one of the most important inventions in human history, Fritts died in relative obscurity. The timing of his breakthrough proved to be his undoing. In 1883, coal was cheap and abundant. Few could imagine it ever running out, and fewer still worried about its environmental impact. The electrical grid was in its infancy, and the market for alternative energy simply didn't exist. The limitations of 19th century technology also worked against him. His selenium cells were too inefficient to compete with coal power economically. While he correctly predicted that future improvements would make solar power viable, he lacked the resources to develop these improvements himself. But perhaps the cruelest blow was how history forgot him. As the 20th century dawned, the scientific establishment continued to dismiss solar power as impractical. His patents gathered dust. His papers were archived and forgotten. When Bell Labs created their first silicon solar cell in 1954, few remembered that Fritts had blazed this trail 7 decades earlier. The final years of his life were spent in increasing isolation. While Edison became a household name and Tesla achieved cult status, Fritts faded into obscurity. His vision of solar-powered cities remained unrealized in his lifetime. He died believing his life's work had been in vain, never knowing that he had laid the foundation for a revolution that would change the world. Today, as solar panels cover rooftops worldwide and massive solar farms power entire cities, Charles Fritts' vindication is complete. The technology he pioneered now produces hundreds of gigawatts of clean electricity annually. The solar revolution he predicted is finally happening, even if it arrived a century later than he hoped. In 2022 alone, the world installed more solar power capacity than Fritts could have imagined in his wildest dreams. Every one of these installations, whether it's a small rooftop array or a vast solar farm, carries a trace of his DNA. The basic photovoltaic principle he discovered remains at the heart of modern solar technology. But perhaps his greatest legacy isn't technological, it's inspirational. Fritts showed us that one person, working alone and against overwhelming odds, can glimpse the future and help make it reality. He proved that ridicule and rejection don't determine truth. Sometimes, being right too soon is the loneliest position of all. As we face the challenges of climate change and energy transition, Fritts' story resonates more than ever. He understood, well before anyone else, that the sun could free us from our dependence on fossil fuels. He saw our future with remarkable clarity, even if he didn't live to see it arrive. So the next time you see a solar panel gleaming in the sunlight, remember Charles Fritts. Remember the forgotten genius who, in a modest New York workshop, took the first step toward the clean energy future we're building today. If you've enjoyed discovering this forgotten chapter of history, make sure to subscribe for more stories of forgotten geniuses who changed our world. Let me know in the comments what other overlooked innovators you'd like to learn about. And remember, sometimes the most important breakthroughs don't come from famous names or big laboratories. Sometimes they come from quiet dreamers who dare to imagine a better future, even when no one else can see it.